And it's the start of a new week. Hello there, you're watching The Pulse on the Joy News channel. Coming up, Trades Minister designates Kobina Tahir Hammond under fire as he faces stiff opposition from the minority in Parliament, which is raising questions over the propriety of President Akufo-Addo's intentions to replace the nominee with the former Trades Minister Alan Kojo-Kyerematen. We'll bring you excerpts plus get you the latest of what's happening in Parliament. Also, coming up, former Finance Minister Dr. Duffour calls for the dissolution of government's economic management team, insisting its members cannot be trusted to follow through Ghana's economic recovery.
The management team must be looked at.
As in the economic management team?
I think so. Well, see, the other ones who, including the finance people, who created the problem, can they solve the problem?
There's more from the presidential hopeful shortly. We're looking about pay structure. This afternoon, inequality is becoming pervasive in the public sector. Recent findings by the Ghana Statistical Service is indicating a widening pay gap, with over 80% of the worker population in the public sector earning less than 3,000 Ghana cedis. We have details coming up on that, but it's also a health hazard, and experts are beginning to raise concerns about it. Ghana's air quality ranks one of the world's worst, as monitors record an uptick in the concentration of some fine particles in the atmosphere that could be detrimental to your health. We'll hear from some health experts who are advising very sensitive persons to wear nose masks.
The pollutant levels exceeded national limits and World Health Organization interim target 3 values of 35 and 25 microcubic meters respectively.
And we're set to get the details on that for you shortly. This is The Pulse. We're live on DSTV channel 421, GoTV channel 144. The Pulse, as always, is brought to you by Global Communities, Digni Lu, Affordable Safe Sanitation. Don't forget that Joy News is independent, fearless, and credible. Welcome to The Pulse. We're back with the details shortly. Well, it's a long-held perception, but now it's becoming a reality that inequality is pervasive indeed in the public sector. Well, that's according to the government statistician, Professor Samuel Kobina-Anim, who has supervised the release of some findings in the maiden report on earning inequality in the public sector. Details of that document is indicating that as many as 80% of the working population in the public sector earns less than 3,000 Ghana cedis. But what are the implications of these recent findings, and what more do we need to know about earning inequality in Ghana? Let's start off by welcoming Professor Samuel Kobina-Anim to the show. Good afternoon to you, sir. Welcome to The Pulse. Even before we get into the details of these striking details and figures that you're putting out, it's important to underscore the point that in spite of this widening gap that we're talking about, the story is even dire for women. What were your findings?
And good afternoon to all your viewers. Indeed, Ghana Statistical Service did release its maiden report on earnings inequalities in the public sector. It is important we put the release in its right context by saying that Ghana is currently deploying a universal salary structure. And what that means is that variations in earnings would emanate only as a result of variations in grades. The universal salary structure would not allow variations in earnings to occur by virtue of sex, as you tried saying, by virtue of location or by virtue of age. As I indicated, the only variation would be associated with variations in grades. What we found indicated that on the average, men were earning 165 Ghana cedis more than what women were earning on the average. Once this is happening, the first thing that should come to mind is that it's possible that we have a lot more men with higher grades relative to females. It doesn't necessarily mean that men and women on the same grade would have price variations, because that is not a tenet of the universal salary structure. What is important for us is once you estimate inequality, you are able to attribute inequality as a result of within men and inequality as a result of men across women. So what we did show that the variations in earnings across sex was less significant relative to variations within the same sex. So we saw a lot more variations within sex rather than variations across sex.
But I'm just wondering why gender is becoming a determinant of payment of salaries and even allowances in the public sector.
So let me repeat that again.
Right.
Gender based on the universal salary structure would never cause any variation.
Okay.
If there is a variation, it has to do with the grades that people are on. So one would be on a higher grade and the other will be on a lower grade. So once you see this variation, what that means is that you have a lot more men in the higher grade rather than females. And this is as a result of the qualification that they use to enter, i.e. education, and the experience that they've been on the particular grade. Because the salary structure is such that as you spend a lot more years, you get higher salaries over time. And also, if based on your qualification you entered at a higher level, then you're going to attract higher earnings relative to those who enter at a lower level. So the universal salary structure, for the sake of clarity, would not discriminate on the basis of sex.
Let's take a look at, is it Upper West or Upper East, for example? Some nuances there. Are you able to explain what's happening? Because they
Yes.
seem to have some higher levels in terms of the disparity.
Yeah, so again, it is important we set this record clear that on the universal salary structure, there wouldn't be variations across geographical locations. So what that means is that if I'm an accountant and I'm on a grade such as 23H, and there is another accountant in the Upper West region on the same grade, 23H, based on the principles of the universal salary structure, we both will be earning the same. Once you see these variations, it goes back to the point that I was making. These variations would emanate as a result of differences in grade. So all that this means is that we are seeing a lot more people in Greater Accra region that recorded the highest average earnings with higher grades relative to what we are seeing in the Northeast region, which had an average earnings of 2,212 compared to that of Accra, Greater Accra region, 3,142. So again, you would not discriminate public sector worker earnings just based on location. But once you see the averages varying across different locations, then it means that in one location, you have a lot more people on a higher grade relative to the other geographical area.
Well, that's it on gender, but the overall picture is not encouraging. And I recall your words that inequality is pervasive in the public sector. A reason for which, for example, we have over 80% of the working force, those you carried out the research on, earning less than 3,000 Ghana cedis.
You're right. We did indicate that earnings inequality is pervasive in the public sector, and we did that based on a comparison perspective. So we look at that from the basic salary point of view, from the gross salary point of view, and from the net salary point of view. So yes, the report did put out that about 80% of public sector employees are earning less than 3,000. For us, our interest is what is happening on the other side of the coin in terms of those who are earning high. So we calculated what we call the Palmer ratio, which allows us to see the proportion of earnings between the top 10% and the bottom 40%. And we saw that the top 10% are earning 82% of what the bottom 40% are earning. It is this disparity that we are emphasizing. The top 10% are earning 82% of what the bottom 40% are earning. Another striking observation had to do with variations across the three different salary points that I talked about. That is the basic, the gross, and the net. If you take the basic salary, we saw inequality of 20%. But once you take it to the gross salary, that is when you added allowances to the basic salary, earnings inequalities increases from 20% to 23.7%. So our argument there is that the allowances that public sector employees receive deepens the earnings inequality because it increased from 20% to 23.7%. Again, we looked at a third pointer for salaries, which is net salaries, and we argue that between your gross salary and your net salary, are the deductions, what goes to SNIT, what goes to tier 2, and the taxes. Ordinarily, what taxes are supposed to do is to help us redistribute income. So it's expected that it's going to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. That is one of the reasons why Ghana is deploying a progressive tax system. But once you look at your net salaries, inequalities reduces, but reduces only marginally from 23.7 to I think 22.7. So it doesn't get to the level of 20% where basic salary took us to. So the second point that we make is that yes, the deductions are regressive by reducing earnings inequality, but that reduction is minimal.
For those who are paying somewhere around 3,000 or who are being paid 3,000 Ghana cedis, for instance, the share of the burden in terms of the tax differential, I don't know if I'm pointing out the using the technical term right, that difference is very minute. It places more burden on the low income, relatively lower income earners, correct?
You are absolutely right. And this is why we are saying that this work has come in to point to a number of policy issues that might require review. One of which is, yes, our tax system is progressive, but to what extent is it progressive? That's the conversation we should have. And what is making us say this conversation is important is that those earning more than 10,000, their deductions was about 25% of their earnings. And those earning less than 3,000, their deductions were 20%. So you are right. It's put in relatively, although again, it's regressive in terms of reducing earnings inequality. The variation of 5 percentage points from a deduction point of view relative to the earnings of less than 3,000 as against more than 10,000 is definitely something that should strike policymakers for a rethink.
We'll talk about what next, and this is the time I guess we'll have to look at the implications. You may want to talk about efficiency and other issues in the public sector, but I'm concerned about the effect on the household economy, for instance, because obviously these people earning the 3,000s will have dependents. Inflation marginally dropped, just as you announced earlier, a couple of weeks ago or days ago. Looking at what's happening in terms of this earnings inequality, just opposing that to inflation. Let's talk about that implication first, and then we'll explore the others.
I mean, definitely one would argue that inflation definitely affects earnings of public sector workers. So you are right, if inflation is around 53.6%, the nominal income, 3,000 in real terms, would be affected to a large extent. So definitely it's a conversation that we should have. But let me caution the conversation along those lines, because this is work that has relied on administrative data sources, i.e. earnings that goes through the Controller and Accountant General's department. I mean, during the presentation, people were asking questions related to what happens with desktop allowances and so on and so forth. And in the past, Ghana Statistical Service had relied on only consumption expenditure to get an understanding of what our inequality is. And what we are doing now is to look at it from the perspective of earnings. Going forward, what we need to do as Statistical Services is, one, to make sure that we bring on board all the government sector employees, because there are some government sector employees who do not get their salaries through the Controller and Accountant General Department. So Bank of Ghana is missing here, Ghana Revenue Authority is missing here, SNIT is missing here. All the institutions that do not run their salaries via the Controller and Accountant General Department are missing in this conversation. But if we get that, then the next thing will be to look at what is happening from the private sector point of view. We've diversified the space by which we are measuring inequality, because beyond this work, our aim is we have calculated inequality from consumption expenditure point of view. We've done it now from the earnings inequality point of view. And going forward, we need to do it from at least the wealth and the assets point of view. So as a country, we're going to have statistics on inequalities from different spaces. Then we can begin to really think through which other macroeconomic variables would affect which other spaces of inequality. Because if a lot of people are getting desktop allowances, are receiving remittances, then one would not be accurate in using the 3,000 Ghana cedis as basis to say that then this is their real income and then it's of concern.
Okay.
We are hoping that this conversation will stir a discussion on going forward, how we can consolidate all our earnings so that we see exactly what people are taking home, then juxtapose that with their expenditures before we can make some accurate judgment on how other macroeconomic variables like inflation would impact on these amounts.
And Prof, I'll tell you about what's on my heart. It's about the political class as well. We need that data in such a time that we find ourselves. Ghana's economy is not performing well, and I'm sure that the concern has been that these class of individuals drain the public purse. You may refrain from indicating your personal opinion on that, but are we likely to see any data, at least the data on that aspect? That question has come up, of course, when you were launching the findings of this inequality report.
At some point, that data would be made available. In the report that we released, we have anonymized the identities of groups of people and MDAs. The only reason why we do that is, as I indicated, this is a cross-section of public sector employees. It's about 90% of public sector employees anyway. But to put out a report that does not reflect all the public sector employees would be representing something that would take away the conversation from what the substance is to what the institution is. And that is why we decided that in this maiden report, we anonymize it from an institution point of view and also anonymize it from groups of people point of view. But definitely the data that sits with the Control and Accountant General Department, as we indicated, touches on 129 people on 129 different payrolls and across 50 government ministries, departments, and agencies. So that information is there, but it would be only good once we get the full complement of all the government institutions. Then we can authoritatively say that it is this particular institution that is earning higher than that other institution. From our point of view, as you rightly indicated, our aim is to align this data to the issue of productivity. So the basic question that we are asking is that the payroll with the highest average earnings of about 22,925 and the payroll with the least average earning of about 1,619. Does it mean that from a productivity point of view, from a risk point of view, from an importance point of view, these institutions are 14 times more productive than the ones at the lower bottom? That is the conversation. And also from the MDA point of view, the MDA that is receiving the highest average earnings of about 9,900 relative to the MDA receiving the least of about 2,200, which is about a 4 times difference. Does it mean that that MDA is more productive 4 times than the other MDA? And this is exactly why this conversation for us is important.
Let's talk about, finally, the next steps. What's likely to happen?
So first, we are going to institutionalize these releases. We're not going to do it on a monthly basis, but we're going to work towards at least releasing it twice a year. Some of the questions that we've asked is based on the findings is that if you look at the employment over the years, using years of experience as a proxy for it, we don't see any discernible pattern. So again, we have to institutionalize this so that on a regular basis, we can see how government are employing people, at what grades are they employing them, in what numbers are they employing them. We've seen the regional variations in terms of numbers. We see Northeast Savannah recording about 9,000 or so employees, whereas Greater Accra and Ashanti region are in the order of 18-17% of the total employees. So we are seeing wide variations. And then now the question is, what minimum number of government employees do we need in any geographical jurisdiction, be it the district level, be it the regional level, and what expertise is needed and at what rate should it grow? So this is why we are going to institutionalize this and hoping that going forward we can get the other agencies that provide the data for the institutions that are not on board to also help us with it. We're going to approach SNIT, we're going to approach the Ghana Revenue Authority, because we think these are avenues that we can get data to complement whatever we have. Expand this, and then with our surveys, as I indicated earlier on, we can have a comprehensive measure of inequality from different spaces to really get a hold on our development that we seek to achieve.
Right. I was speaking to Professor, and I thought that would have been the last one, but I was speaking to Professor Bokpin last night on the probe. He had some concerns about the findings that you put out. The fact that we have over 80% earning 3,000, and if you juxtapose that to the cost of living, for instance, just in Accra alone, his belief is something is going wrong within the sector, looking at the cost and how people are managing their lives earning below 3,000 Ghana cedis, 80% of that.
I mean, I share that concern because if you look at the cost of living currently, if one is earning less than 3,000 and he's the only earner in the house and has an average household size of 3 or 4 persons in the household, managing that household size with the 3,000 has implications on the extent to which it will suffice. So I do agree with that concern.
And the conclusion may be corruption, maybe?
So we try as much as possible not to draw these conclusions once we don't have the numbers.
Yeah, I'm also doing my job as a journalist. I hope you understand that, Professor Anim. Thank you. I'm grateful, and we'll see you again here on the Pulse. But bye-bye for now. Okay, then, former Finance Minister Dr. Kwabena Duffour says government's economic management team should be dissolved and reconstituted. The team led by Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia with Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta as a member takes crucial decision on how Ghana's economy should be managed. Well, listen, we'll definitely be bringing you excerpts of what it is that Yao Safo said in 2019 about Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. But here's a conversation of my colleague Joseph Akable sitting down with Dr. Kwabena Duffour, and he put the question as to what should be happening to that set of economic management team.
So we are here to speak to Dr. Kwabena Duffour. He is someone who has quite a deep understanding of the Ghanaian economy, and he's been around, managed it, played various key roles, including being at the regulator at a point in time. And so we'll be tapping into his perspectives on what he makes of the current challenges and the way forward. Doc, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us.
Thank you for coming too.
I mean, Doc, if you're asked to, describe the current state of the Ghanaian economy from your own understanding, how will you describe it?
Thank you. The Ghanaian economy is in crisis as a result of deterioration in the public finances of our nation. Over the years, precisely over the past 10 years, we have been accumulating debt, huge debt. The figures released by the Bank of Ghana indicate that the central government debt stands at about 575 billion Ghana cedis. When you add the state-owned enterprise debts, it means our public debt is over 600 billion cedis. The reason why we are in crisis is that for the same period, as a nation, we have not been able to mobilize domestic financial resources. Resources from tax and non-tax revenue. In our public finances, domestic resource mobilization has no substitute. You don't pay interest on this. When you're able to grow your domestic revenue, you are safeguarding your national sovereignty, because you're not going to be involved in reckless borrowing, especially foreign borrowing, which may endanger your national sovereignty. Right now we have that problem. We are begging for debt forgiveness. You understand?
We'll come a bit more on the debt forgiveness, but just a couple of years ago, especially the COVID period, we even recorded positive growth. The economy not too long ago was doing quite well. Beyond the failure to marshal domestic revenue, do you think there's something that we did wrong directly, or what we could have done differently that could have averted where we find ourselves now, the crisis you talk about?
No, you see, having accumulated foreign debt of $15 billion from the Eurobond market within 8 years, between 2013 and 2021. It's not only the size of the debt, but the period, 8 years. It's a short period for a nation to accumulate such a huge debt. You made a point. The servicing of this foreign debt in hard currency has been a problem because we are not exporting goods and services which earn us enough revenue in hard currency to be able to service this particular huge foreign debt. What happened was that we were borrowing from the same market to pay the interest on this huge foreign debt. And when we were asked to stop, we had a huge problem. And don't forget, the history of world debt crisis, the history indicates that it starts from foreign debt, always not domestic debt. So the 15 billion within 8 years has been a huge challenge for Ghana.
I mean, what value would you put on the influence of external factors? I mean, we've heard a refrain about Russia, Ukraine. I mean, what value would you place on that?
That's what that such a big war will affect all nations dealing with Ukraine. But if you look at other African countries, they were able to manage the situation. You understand? Especially by 15 of the African states registered single-digit inflation over the same period, when ours hovers around 50%. So there must be a problem domestically. Okay? Yeah.
I mean, if you're asked to, place values on it in terms of maybe 50-50, 60-40, the chunk of the challenge, will it be domestic or external?
Now look at the drivers of inflation in Ghana. About 10 drivers are all food related. You understand? We are unable to produce enough rice. Basic food. Even fruits. And they are not Ukraine war related. I don't believe that. We are not producing enough. Period. As a nation, we are not working hard enough. We're not producing hard enough. Food production should not be a problem for us. You understand? Yeah.
I mean, in the midst of all these challenges, government took the view that going to seek support from the IMF was what they wanted to do. I mean, even though quite earlier they had indicated clearly that we're not going to go back to the IMF. I mean, you have been at the finance ministry before. Assuming you were there at this point in time when you realized that, okay, this is how the books look. We are indebted. We can't, our balance of payment doesn't look too good. And cabinets, you're in cabinet and they're asking for advice. I mean, would the IMF had been an option you would have suggested that government should go in for?
We have there before, but when we were there, we focused on domestic resource mobilization. We cut down government expenditure. During our time, for example, we reduced the ministries, the MDAs, from 27 to 23. So reduction or cut in government expenditure was a major, policy. You must always balance your revenue with expenditure. When you are unable to pay your bills, we say that you have debt unsustainability. You will be forced to seek support from outside. But when you're able to pay your bills, able to balance your revenue with expenditure, you will not go out looking for support. The situation we are in, we had to look for support because over the years, we were not able to do that. We were not living within our means, you understand? It's not how much you earn, but how you're able to manage the income you make. We as a nation, we appear to be living not within our means, but above. That's a problem.
I mean, as at November, our debt totaling was about $43.9 billion. And one of the things government is trying to do with the IMF program is to attempt to restructure these debts. And so far, I mean, a chunk of the focus has been on the domestic debt restructuring. I mean, government has been criticized, especially because of the new bonds they try to trade for the old ones and push the maturity date a bit back. What's your reading of that particular transaction?
There was a contract between government and individuals who went in for the bond. In the midst, if you want to change the contract, you should start negotiations with the people. You understand? For example, I have an interest in an insurance company. There's a contract between the insurance company and the clients. You have insured your car for the insurance company. That when it's an accident, they should be able to restore you, give enough to cover. The way it is, if government, because of difficulty, is giving them new bond and not be paying enough interest, when there's a problem with you because your car is involved in an accident, what will happen between you and the insurance company? They may say, we don't have money to pay, but you have contract with them, not the government. What would you do if you find yourself in this situation? So there should have been lots of consultations, discussions for the two parties, government and the bondholders, to agree on the way forward.
I mean, the quantum of the domestic debt was a little over 100 billion. Eventually, when government closed the process, they said it had come down a bit because of trading in some of the bonds, among others. I mean, if you were to be at the helm of affairs targeting which bonds to restructure and which ones not to, I mean, topical amongst them has been the individual bondholders and the pensioner bondholders. Would those two have been something that you would have, I mean, in simple terms, put your hands over and try to convince them in these talks that you are suggesting?
You see, we seem to be talking about the debt treatment. I don't believe that's a problem facing us. Our problem goes beyond debt treatment. You understand? How did you get there in the first place? So we, the managers of the economy, I say we because I've been there before, we, the managers of the economy, we have created a problem. And those who had nothing to do with the problem have been asked to solve the problem. Is that fair?
I mean, government says in simple terms, I owe you, but I can't meet the commitments. Something must give.
No. They could have done it in a different way. Call all of us. There has been a problem with the management of the economy. We borrow so much money to manage the economy. Something has gone wrong. What can we do together? Understand?
I mean,
there should have been a lot of consultations, discussions about the problem, so that we buy in. They should ask for our buying into the problem. What can you do to help us? Not take it or leave it.
I mean, was the attempt to, deal with the pensioner bondholders, for instance? Do you think that was a viable move? I mean, currently we are being told that they wanted total exemption. Eventually, just a couple of days ago, the finance minister has now written to them after the agitations and everything to say that, okay, I've granted the exemption now. But, I mean, it's still voluntary. Those who want to participate have already participated, and those who didn't have also stayed away from it. I mean, what was the whole exercise good in itself? Was it good move, because there are some who hold the view that those are very vulnerable groups that government should not have touched at all, especially because they are people who have worked many years, and that is what they are basically living on the coupons.
Yeah, if we had cut down the size of government, we would have made some savings there. Instead of touching the pensioners' bonds, of course, not much, you understand? A cut in the size of government would have made enough savings to cover what we are looking for from the pensioners. You don't think so?
I mean, that would have brought down, in terms of our expenditure, that would have brought it down.
Exactly. Bring down the expenditure, make some savings, so that you don't touch these old people whose pensions is so dear to them. We had a workshop years ago on the pension of those who had worked in the public sector. You better believe, about 53% of the people don't earn more than 500 cedis a month. The pensioners' issue is a very sad issue that must be looked at. Those who have worked in the public sector and our pension, not more than about 53% of them don't earn more than 500 Ghana cedis about 2 years ago when we did this exercise. So it's very pathetic dealing with pensioners, especially those who have worked so hard in the public sector.
I mean, for about 7 days, I mean, we covered it extensively. You had the, I mean, I'm sure some of them were people that you even worked with in government. Dr. Edward Anentwi was at the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Yeah.
The former Chief Justice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you saw those visuals of being at your former office.
Yeah.
I mean, when you saw those visuals, what was running through your mind?
I feel sad, very sad. We also have information, data on how much they take home every month from their pension. Very small. Very few take 2,000 cedis a month. Very few of them. And some of them work for 35 years, but they've been almost 40 years for the nation. So if we have to cut down government expenditure to save them, I would do that.
I mean, for now, I mean, we did a period of attempting to get some of them to sign on to the bonds